Here's how to change the distributor on a 170 cubic inch Ford Inline 6 from the 1960s. This is a 1961 Ford Falcon. Pry the clips off the sides of the distributor with a screwdriver and then pop the cap loose. We pulled the first and second cylinder spark plug wires off. We also labeled them and then set it to the side so we can get at the distributor. Use something to mark the distributor with the location of the rotor. So I've scratched a little groove into it. Even though there's a play in the rotor, I've scratched a little groove next to where the rotor is pointing. And I've also scribed the mark down at the bottom of the distributor where it attaches to the crankcase.
Now, if the problem is with the vacuum advance unit, you can buy a new one and replace it. And it's just held on with this little cotter pin and then these two bolts here. So if you're going to try to do it in car, you got to pull that out without dropping it on the old one. Undo these two bolts, pop that off, and then put the pin on the new one.
There's a ground wire on the coil that you need to undo.
I'm going to use a 3/4 and a 3/8 inch wrench to take the vacuum line off and just move it to the side. The distributor bolt is back and to the right over here, and it's a 1/2 inch. So if you have a 1/2 inch distributor wrench, you just go in there and break it loose. We had to beat on it with a rubber mallet from the bottom a little bit, but it is out 60 years later. Check the point gap on the new one before you put it in the car because it's easier. 27 thousandths is what we have on this car. So on my old distributor, the rotor was pointing to this mark. So on the new one, we're going to approximate that here and then make the rotor point to it. So lining it up with the marker is a little bit tricky because when we push it into the engine, it's going to rotate that much, the length of one of these splines. So we're going to line it up to that far above the mark, and then when we push it in, we hope it hits the mark. We'll see how close we can get. All right, I've also scribed a mark right here so that we can see where the base of it goes. We've got my mark up there, and we'll see how close we can get when we jam it in the hole. So putting it into the hole, you're going to feel a little bit of resistance. When this rubber gasket hits the block and you have to push it through that, we've greased it up a little bit to make it easier. And then you'll see this rotate as it goes in. So you just want to make sure after it rotates, it's flush with your mark. And then the black wire on our old one was routed around the back towards the engine side. So that's what we're doing. So I've got my mark, and then I'm going to move it, looking at the splines, about that much. And then hopefully we push it in and it chunks over to be correct. I'm grabbing onto the rotor to kind of guide it in. Ooh, that's pretty good. It should run. My mark is right there. So that's about as good as you can hope for. And the wire was routed behind the distributor. So we're just going to send it this way and then bolt it down there. So Backyard Mechanic 101 rule is you got to look at the part and compare it to the old part before you put it in. So on ours, the original one from the 60s had a longer piece here. So we're going to have to adjust the vacuum line to fit that and go around this stupid dipstick. You can see what I mean here, and this doesn't come off. So the standard vacuum line was broken on one end. So we're just going to replace it with a modern brake line. There's the documents on it. So if that happens to you, we're going to try using a brake line as a vacuum line, see if it works, see if we get kicked down on the transmission. The only thing I'm not sure about is how tight the seal is right there on the end when it's screwed down. All right, so the new brake line slash vacuum line is going through there. Just routed it around so it's not rubbing against anything. And then we had to do a U-turn around the dipstick to get it into the new distributor. So now I'm tightening it back down. Got the rotor lined up with my mark from the previous one, and I'm using a 1/2 inch wrench to tighten it down. All right, now Grandpa puts the cap back on and reattaches the plug wires, which we labeled beforehand. I would definitely recommend changing your spark plug wires if you're going to do this. So the spark plug order is 1, 5, 3, 6, 2, 4. All right, let's see if it'll start. There's a beautiful final product with the fresh wires, 8 degrees before top dead center is how we timed it, and it runs happier than it ever has in decades. And I'm doing 29, we're doing 29 miles an hour. Woo!